Vayechi, called thus because of the first word of this parsha, which means, and Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. And the Zohar here, strange Zohar, but it includes, because it says, Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim, it says, because it says that he lived here in Egypt, to tell us that something was unusual, that he lived. In other words, based on previous explanations of the Zohar and the Torah, you can live, and then there are those that we consider as just having existed. You could be alive, it doesn't mean you're living. You're just existing. So when it says here, Vayechi, understand the Zohar, that Vayechi means that he really lived. Lived. Now what does that mean that he lived? Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim, Amar Rab Yossi, li b'chama b'nevuah. Strange. He saw. His heart, that is, saw in Nevuah, prophecy in Egypt. What did he see? Diyam b'noi b'kama galuim ad hacha, bad edna b'ketz mishicha. And he saw that his children here he saw it in Egypt, like as if he didn't see it before. But here in Egypt, he saw that his children would live through many exiles until the present time, which would be the end of Mashiach. And where did this prophecy originate, or where did it arise from? Says the Zohar, only in Egypt. Only in Egypt. Vihi nevuah ma'aliyata. Not only did he for the first time connect with prophecy, meaning to see the entire future. We have to understand that we're talking about Yaakov, and Yaakov already by this time is referred to as Yisrael, and once you refer to Yaakov as Yisrael, you're referring to now to an individual who had achieved the upper triad. That was his place, the upper triad, to be in the place of Tiferet, which is above, obviously, above the level of Esadat, the level of good and evil. He already was elevated to a point where there is only Esachayim, where there is no time, space, and motion as we know it, where all of the illusions that exist at this level of Esadat, the tree of knowledge, reality does not exist. And now he achieves another level of consciousness, referred to as nevuah, prophecy. Although we know that prophecy is a netzach hod, is just to give us an idea of where this consciousness of the nevuah, in other words, if someone achieves netzach and hod, these levels of consciousness, which of course exist in the lower triad of the Star of David, in the lower triad, once an individual had achieved that level of consciousness, then he has achieved nevuah. But we understand that Yaakov was not in the lower triad, but he had already elevated himself to the level of consciousness in the upper regions. So we have to understand why does the Zohar explain that when it says Vayechi, and this is the word that he's, as he will explain shortly, indicating when it says that Yaakov lived, it's not merely to tell us that he lived there, or rather than, although we say we lived there, but usually the proper word would be, and he lived there. But lived there in Hebrew is not Vayechi. Although in English you say, well, where do you live? But in Hebrew there's a very specific word, because if you're referring to a domicile, where's your home? Ani gar. There's another word. And in the Torah too, there's another word for where do you live, meaning referring to a domicile, a place of a habitat where you sleep, you eat, etc. And the reason that in Hebrew there's a distinction, again, as we mentioned previously, because you can live, you can live, meaning I live in that house. It doesn't mean Vayechi. It doesn't mean that you're really alive. You could be just existing at that address, and therefore there are different words. And therefore in Hebrew he says Eifat Hagar. Where do you live? Well, in English I translated it as such, but actually the word is where is your domicile. You don't even use the word live, because living is not necessarily associated with a domicile. You can exist in hell, in a prison of 4 walls and not have bars. So from that, the Zohar understands that when it says by Chi Yaakov, it is referring to this elevation to Nevuah of Vayechi. And where did it take place? Be'eretz Mitzrayim. And V'hi Nevuah Chashuvah. And says the Zohar, that Hi Nevuah Ma'ayeta, it is of such a high state, Chashuv, Lo it naviu dekavatei. But nowhere else, not even in Israel, did Jacob achieve this level of prophecy. What does that mean, prophecy? Prophecy means, you can see tomorrow, time, space, and motion is not considered a limitation for the individual. It's all here, as scientists say. Yesterday, tomorrow, the present are all presently existing at the same time. But Yaakov already had achieved Etz HaChaim, where we know the difference between Etz HaChaim and Etz HaDat, where one has achieved prophecy, is that prophecy is momentarily. In other words, he sees it today, but tomorrow, if he's not in the level of the upper triad, where time, space, and motion ceases to exist completely, as the Shabbat we achieved in our lives, that connection of Eitz HaDat, being connected with Eitz HaChaim, losing, not in our conscious level, because the minute I say, well, so what should I buy today in the stock market? Since on Shabbat, we had already achieved the Eitz HaChaim level. So now, why can't I know what's going up? Because the minute you know what's going up, and it becomes part of your consciousness, then where are you? You're back in Eitz HaDat. Because it is only the non-conscious, the 94% of us, that when that is directing our movements, and you say, well, what should I do now? I don't know what to do now. And then the thought comes to you, do this, do that, do this, do that. And you don't know where the thought came from, and then you go ahead robotically and do what you have to do, then you know it's right. But if the thought comes and now you say, well, I want to know what tomorrow is about. When the thought in the Eitz HaChaim level comes and tells you what to do tomorrow, it must come without prior thought, without thinking, well, I know the stock market is open today, and I will buy some stocks that, of course, will go up, because in the Eitz HaChaim level we know that there is no instability, no uncertainty, and so on. We have materialized that into the Eitz HaDat consciousness. We have materialized that into a consciousness. Anything that becomes materialized in my consciousness is no longer part of Eitz HaChaim. So, the level of Nevuah, prophecy, exists only in Eitz HaDat, because at that moment, at that moment, like here, says the Zohar, Yaakov achieved Nebuah more so than any of the prophecy he might have achieved in Israel, as he lived in Israel. Because this was Egypt. And we'll shortly understand why, but because he lived in Egypt, when it says Vayechi Yaakov, and he lived, meaning he became connected from time to time. In this case, in this beginning of this week's section, he became connected to that realm. That realm of Eitz Hadat became connected at that moment. Mind you, Eitz Hadat, there are times, like on Shabbat, we brought our Eitz Hadat into the reality of Eitz HaChaim, into Eitz HaChaim. At this moment, when he came to Egypt, he also made that connection. And therefore, time, space, and motion no longer existed, and therefore, he achieved prophecy. But, adds the Zohar, but a prophecy that far exceeded in excellence to any other of the prophecies that when he had, on previous occasions, spoken to God himself, meaning he had achieved prophecy, he had elevated himself to a space, to a consciousness that was not limited to the factor of time, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. This kind of prophecy he never had achieved before. Not only had he never achieved this level of prophecy anywhere else, but that the prophecy we are discussing was not achieved by any other person, any other prophet mentioned throughout scriptures other than he and Moses, says the Zohar. Tiv ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai b'Yakov k'tiv v'Vayechi Yaakov. There it says, when Moses says, I want to see God face to face, and it says, no, anyone looking at the light force face to face, without any insulation, without any masach, without any curtain, so on, cannot live. It just, in this corporeal body, what he said Moses would die if he looked at God face to face, what he was actually referring to was that this physical body would have to necessarily disintegrate. It could not coexist with a direct contact with the light force, and therefore the light force as electricity. The bulb, we cannot connect directly to the light force. It comes in an insulated capsule, wiring, insulation, and so on, for the simple reason that direct contact with any raw naked energy cannot coexist on this level where we find ourselves. All right. So this nevuah that we're talking about now, this prophecy that he shortly is going to describe for us, no one had achieved that level of understanding other than Moses, because it says by Moses the word chai, and it says Vayechi Yaakov, and Vayechi nevuata denachsa me aspaklaria denahara. And this kind of nevuah, which emanates from the light that shines, as opposed to this world which has no light of its own, it does not shine, like the moon. The moon can act as a channel for the light, but it by and within itself does not contain light like the sun. The sun has brilliance of its own. It is not dependent upon another celestial body to shine upon it, and we will achieve. We can nourish the reflection. Actually, when we look at the moon, we're not looking at the light of the moon. What we're looking at when we look at the moon is a reflection of the sun shining on the moon, and it bounces off, and what we see when we look at the moon is the reflection of the sun. That's called aspaklaria, a ray of light that does not shine that does not shine by and within itself. But where did his prophecy come from? From Aspaklaria de Nahara. It came from a place like the sun, which shines by and within itself. What is the difference? The difference is obvious. Like when the sun shines at a mirror or onto a glass, and we receive or we're hit, it bounces off, and we can observe the reflection. Reflection obviously is not as strong, it's not as illuminating as direct light. The sun is direct light. Therefore, we are incapable, because we are incapable of connecting with direct light. But Moses, and in this case Yaakov, were capable of connecting directly to the level of Zeir Anpin, as we know it, meaning the level of a consciousness that does not receive indirect consciousness, indirect thoughts, indirect information, but direct. And obviously that is of a much higher level of consciousness. This is how the Zohar explains the idea by Chi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim. And Rabbi Ashlag goes on to a lengthy discourse on the differences, which I discussed for you briefly, the differences between Nevuah in general, prophecy in general, and the prophecy that's taking place here in Egypt. Now, why in this area called Egypt, which the Zohar continues to explain why in this particular area did not only Jacob but Moses lived in Egypt as well, and this is where he made his direct contact with God, meaning when he spoke to God, meaning he had achieved a level of consciousness where he was in a position to draw access into the direct light of God without fear of a burnout. Only in Egypt. Says the Zohar, as Rabbi Ashlag explains it at length here, within Egypt was included, as you said before, all of the following future exiles that the world would undergo. Because as we know, when the Jewish people undergo an exile, it is not the Jewish people who are being punished, but it is the entire world that also suffers the diminution or the absence of the light of God, or the light force is not pervading this universe. And consequently, when there's no light, there is darkness, and when there is darkness, then darkness consists of fragmentation and all of the difficulties and all of the chaos that all of us experience almost daily. All of these exiles originated in Egypt. All of these exiles originated in Egypt. What does that mean, all of the exiles? All of the future exiles that would ever occur, including, says the Zohar, this last one, the last one that we live in, was already included. Well, we understand today, DNA, seed levels, etc., that when we speak of seed, we understand that all future manifestations are on a potential level already included in the seed. And the place of darkness, which means that this is the place where the Dark Lord or chaos reigns, has dominion, Consequently, when Yaakov and Moses achieved the kind of prophecy that was not for the moment and gone later, but he had made this connection because he was in that elevated position of Nevuah, because he was not in Netzach and Hod, as I said before. He is not in the lower triad, but rather in the upper triad. Consequently, his Nevuah, his prophecy, was not one of a limited nature, meaning, I can see up until tomorrow. I can see until next week. Although that is also constituted as prophecy, but it is a prophecy also with a limitation. In other words, how far does this prophecy go? Daniel, Yecheskel, all had prophecy, but the prophecy was for a specific incident, a specific event. That's as far as they could say. Could they see everything from beginning to the end? No. They could not see from beginning to the end. They were permitted. They were given, and at times they also worked to achieve this consciousness, the opportunity to connect to Netzach and Hod, where there is prophecies of a limited nature. When Jacob and Moses connected with the Eitz HaChaim, this upper triad, because Moses, who was Netzach, again in the lower triad, ultimately went up when he left the realm of Malchut, when he left his wife and children, if you recall in Exodus, in Shemot, when God calls upon Moses now to be completely devoted to the service of God, as the translators translated, but which means he left the realm of Malchut. I mean, that was pretty cruel for God to say, leave over your wife and children. Now you're only going to be in the service of God. What about his wife? It says he sent them away. Did he really send them away? Of course not. Didn't send them away. Then what does it mean? He left them and now became completely involved in the service of God. The idea was that now, Moses, you are connected to the realm of Eitz HaChaim. And he became Dat. Dat is the connection between the Gar, the upper three regions of Ketach, Chachma, and Bina. Therefore, no one had achieved this level of consciousness as Moses. Whereas Chesed, Gvur, and Tiferet of the upper triad, Chesed, Gvur, and Tiferet, which is Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, in that upper triad, Moses, who was Netzach on one level of existence, now moved into the area of Dat, the connection between the triad of Gar. Okay, yeah, that's a good idea, just for those who are not that familiar. Alright, we have here Ketach, Chachma, and Bina, and here we have Dat. He became the intermediary. Moses became the intermediary between Chesed, Gvur, and Tiferet. This is the realm of Eitz HaChaim, where the snake, where illusion, chaos has no access. Here, which is also part of Eitz HaChaim. However, this area remains as part of Eitz HaChaim. However, in this area, the snake, as we call Satan, can access into only through our actions. In other words, if we create a negative action, because we have this power of connection to any of these realms beside Dat. There are times even though we can achieve Chesed into Chesed, Gvur, on certain holidays. But here, during the week, when we pray the Shachrit, we are elevated into Netzach and Hod by the prayer by the evening, the morning prayer. But through some negative activity by man, then we kind of drag with us the snake, the Satan, into this area of consciousness. But in this area of consciousness, Satan, that seed, that composite of chaos, cannot reach here. Now, there you have a constant flow of energy, and without initiating, that's constant, and that makes the connection between that level and this level. So he also achieved outside of Israel, not in Israel, but outside of Israel. Moses also achieved a connection with this level, which is never subject to the influence of Satan. Never subject to the influence of Satan. So, when we discuss this particular nevuah, this particular prophecy, the reason why the Zohar says, as explained by Rabbi Ashlag, why is this nevuah considered to be so superior to the normal nevuah, to the normal prophecy that Yaakov, when he was in Israel, also connected to prophecy, also could foresee the future. But that was a connection of Netzach and Hod. Only in Egypt could he achieve the connection here to Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferet, to the prophecy, where there the element of prophecy was not of a limited nature, meaning only so much can you see of the future, period. That's all. In this beginning here, Yaakov saw from beginning to end. From beginning to end. So did Moses. When he achieved an elevation to that, the connection between Ket Chachma Bina and the lower levels of consciousness, he too could see from beginning to end, as opposed to the other prophets like Ezekiel, Joshua, and Daniel, who had limited vision. Limited vision, again, it was prophecy. It was of a nature going beyond the limitation of space, time, and motion, but nevertheless limited in its aspect as to the scope that it would encompass. Like the circles we have, one circle into another, into another, into another. There is a quantum definition here, but the quantum element was limited. That's what Netzach and Hod are about. And why did it take place? Why did it take place in Egypt as opposed to Israel? Although this is what the Zohar says, but he does not go on to, only goes on to say, is because, and this is his explanation, but beyond that, there isn't any more that the Zohar adds as to why in this area of Egypt did he achieve this kind of awareness. Because Egypt contained the seed of all future chaos that would ever make its appearance in the world of Eitz Hadat as we know it. All forms of chaos, all games that Satan would ultimately play with us, all of these future events of chaos, of disorder, that would come into our lives last year, this year, and next year, were all already included in a seed level in Egypt. What we learn, what is apparent, when the Zohar connects us to the idea that what was Egypt about? Was it just a geographical place where the Jews would be in exile, says the Zohar? No, goes beyond that. It is the totality of all negative, chaotic consciousness that would ever make its appearance anywhere else on this globe. Anywhere. And this is where the nevuah of Jacob and Moses would have to make its appearance. It could not make it in the land of Israel. So, land of Israel, we learn, is one of the energy centers, one of the 7 places in this globe where the light force is capable of being confined. The light force is capable of being harnessed to the extent that we can make use of it. That was the temple in Israel. Temple could materialize, corporealize the light force, although the light force is of a dimension which is beyond the physical reality as we know it. But it's the same as the soul. How does the soul become materialized? Through the blood and whatever else we learn in the classes. It doesn't really become materialized, but its expression, not it by and within itself. The soul is never, nor does it ever acquire a material aspect to itself, but rather, within this body, it finds an affiliation and an affinity with blood, as explained in the classes, and consequently blood which is of a corporeal nature, now can find this common denominator, blood, which both of them can connect to, like the soul cannot connect to this physical body, but it can make its connection and create an affinity with the blood of the individual, of the human being, and thereby the body which also finds an affinity with the blood. So they both have something in common, and consequently there can be communication between the two. But when it says here that Jacob had achieved, as we will shortly learn, had achieved a level of nevuah, of prophecy, that he could not achieve, but the information as to how long the exiles will extend, how many, when, etc. Why couldn't he have this prophecy in Israel? Since he was connected to the level of Etz HaChaim, where there was no time, space, and motion feature, why couldn't he make the connection? Now, the answer is that we're not discussing knowing the future. Because the Zohar, and when we devote some time to it, can know the future too. All we have to do is analyze, explore, examine past history. Shouldn't that be the best teacher for the future? Why will things change? Have you ever seen a seed plant a seed? This year, plant the seed 50 years from today. Do you expect, if it's an apple seed, that a tree that will emerge 50 years later by a planting of a seed will emerge any different than the seed I planted today? History repeats itself. We hear these kind of expressions, pay no attention. But based on past performance, is there any reason why tomorrow will be any different? The answer is no. The answer is no. They may come in different faces, and we come back from over and over and over again. What changes? Not the essence of the soul. Soul does not undergo any corporeality. It does not undergo a materialism. It makes its connections, but it by and within itself, nothing undergoes changes. Nothing at all. Well, one day, a place can undergo an earthquake somewhere and may never recover from that earthquake. And may never. So you see something happen in the future that could not have been relied upon or could not have been ascertained from previous experiences. And the answer is no. No place will undergo a devastation, an ultimate devastation, let's say of an earthquake, unless there were prior earthquakes, which did not devastate the place. And therefore, like Chas v'Shalom, they say here about Los Angeles, the big one will come. Everyone knows the big one's going to come. The only question is when. So it's already known. How come we're all hanging out here? I mean, is that logic? Is that logic? No. We don't move. Very few people, and if anyone has moved out of California, and the mass exodus out of California today is not because of the fear of an earthquake, but the fear of the economic downturn, that they may not have a place where they can support their families or themselves. Everything is known. Nothing new under the sun, said King Solomon. But what it seems, what the Zohar is expressing at this point here, is Vayechi Yaakov, that in Egypt he also lived. What does it mean he lived? He had Nevuah. So what? How many times we may dream of a future event, but the problem might still be, what can I do about it? So now I know what's going to happen tomorrow. What will we do about it? What can we do about it? Changing events, if they can be changed. And so therefore, this Parsha of Vayechi, and it begins off by Vayechi, is not merely, as it would be indicated shortly in the few verses that we're going to read, as Yaakov, it says, gathered, and the days of Israel drew close to his death, and he called his son Yosef and said he didn't want to be buried in Egypt. And a few verses later, he tells everyone that I want to reveal to you all that will take place in the future. And on that basis, he goes on to bless his children. And we'll shortly come to that verse where he doesn't tell them anything. Doesn't tell them anything. What Vayechi means, just from our present discussion of this Parsha, he wants to provide for us the means for living. Prophecy, having prophecy, does not necessarily mean now that we are in a better position. You know, we may have prophecy of a limited nature to know what we should be doing tomorrow. What about the unforeseen circumstances that we may not have access? Remember we said that prophecy can provide us with some information in Netzach and Hod, but it is of a limited nature. Now, whether an individual who sees how well his fortunes can be made may suffer a heart attack before this whole future of financial security begins, but he suffers a heart attack, and then what's the good of it all? Gone. Or he suffers another illness or another setback aside from financial security. Of what? Was that living? The answer is no. What this Parsha, the entire Parsha, and that's why it's the last Parsha, it's Malchut. It's Malchut. It is the accumulation of all of the energies that week by week have been captured, expressed, made use of. Now they all come together in Malchut, as you learn in Kabbalah. And therefore we should also understand that there are 85 verses. 85 meaning Pei Hey, which is Peh. Why are there 85? Peh. the mouth expression. Now we know here in Kabbalah, one day all synagogues around the world will take notice of why we come to a synagogue to hear the reading of the Parsha, is because this Parsha was designated by the sages to provide us with a clue that here, by our mouths, we can retain a control over future events. When we raise the question, why did Yaakov and Moses receive Nebuah here in Egypt? Why couldn't he receive the same Nebuah in Israel, where the levels of consciousness are of a much higher level and nature? The answer is, knowing what the future events will be and controlling future events can be two different aspects of the same idea. What Yaakov understood, as well as Moses, that if you want to control all future events, you must deal with chaos. You must deal with Malchut. The mouth also represents Malchut. The head. You have the 5 Sfirot, Keter, which is the brain, the eyes, which is Chachma, the ears, which is Binah, the nose, which is Zerampin. The mouth represents the level of consciousness of Malchut, our material world. The culmination, the realization, the materialization, all exist in Malchut. What Yaakov was providing for us here in this section, throughout this Parshat Vayechi, is not only is it sufficient to know what the future will be, but the control over those events that will be coming forth. Now, the events of chaos, and I know that tomorrow, like Isaiah and Jeremiah all predicted, that the end of the temple was drawing close, pleading with the people to change their ways so that the destruction of the temple will not be an event that we have to celebrate on Tisha B'Av. But they didn't listen. But what those prophets were providing for at that moment in time was the possibilities by which the Jews could prevent the destruction. It was even Jeremiah who pleaded on behalf of the Jews and said, what can we do? What can we do at this last moment? The armies of Rome have surrounded the city of Jerusalem. What can we do at this last moment? At this last moment, says the prophet, in prophets of Jeremiah, God says, tell the Jews to free their slaves. Tell the Jews to free their slaves. And that will prevent the onslaught of the Romans. Well, when you have the noose around your neck, even a Jew conforms to the rules, right? And immediately they all released their slaves, every one of them. And lo and behold, a miracle happened. And suddenly Egypt, so says scriptures, Egypt suddenly decided to come and fight and consequently take over Jerusalem themselves against the Roman legions. And so the Roman general took all of the legions that he had surrounding the city of Jerusalem, left the city of Jerusalem, and went and did battle with Egypt. That was truly a miracle. Again, Jeremiah at that given moment foresaw the destruction, but at the same time being a prophet, he received this entitlement on how to overcome a future event. Jeremiah only dealt with that particular event. But what happened soon as the hordes of the Roman legions left Jerusalem, what happened? You all know what happened. What was the next thing the Jews did? Claim back the slaves for themselves again. Since it was all over with, right? Since the miracle had already taken place, immediately, says in Jeremiah, immediately the Jews took back the slaves. And it didn't take too long for the Roman legions to overpower the Egyptian armies, and they returned to destroy the city. That is prophecy. And the prophets were not there merely to spell out the doom, but what they could do about it. And so in this Parsha, not only did Jacob receive the prophecy of all of the future exiles that would take place, but what could be done about it? When and if these exiles were not prevented from taking its proper course, which the Jew can do, he's been given that composite of consciousness. That's what a Jew means. Doesn't mean he's someone of an elevated stature. Doesn't mean that he can never sin. Maybe possibly sin to a degree far worse than one of a lesser consciousness. The non-Jew. Non-Jew referring to someone who was not imbued with that level of consciousness that can relate to the light force of God. And so Vayechi, according to the Zohar, was the opportunity that the Jews were receiving in the world of Malchut to deal with every exile that ultimately would make its appearance. Now, is it only talking about where in the last exile? It's talking about in Vayechi. Vayechi. That when we read this Parsha, we're given again the opportunity, and that opportunity comes every year, if we're aware of it, that all future events in this level of existence, where we exist, where future events can even be foretold. Someone who has a cancer, malignant cancer, chas v'shalom, cut it out. Is it certain that it will not reoccur? Of course not. And yet here we learn how we can eliminate Eitz Hadat. But that would be a miracle. That would not be a miracle. Miracles only exist on this level, where we have no control over Eitz Hadat. But God did not create misfortune. Misfortune should be the rare occasion, because the Eitz Hadat never undergoes changes. The only changes that we can observe is in the physical reality. A person is born as a young man, young woman, and then we gradually get older. Where is that? What gets older? The soul? We celebrate the soul's birthday each year? No, we celebrate the body's birthday each year. The soul does not undergo any changes. So that realm of consistency exists and coexists together with this physical body. But because we do not, or we have not achieved that level of consciousness, whereby we're constantly never failing to be in touch with Eitz HaChaim, is where we undergo these future events. But that chaos can be washed out in a moment. In a moment. Is the rarity of our civilization. But then you look around, you say, what are you talking about? There is more illness confined to people than healthy people. Everyone ultimately winds up to fall into the realm of Eitz Hadat. Illness, sickness, financial insecurity, etc. So therefore, the prophecies here of Yaakov and Moshe dealt with the realm of Eitz Hadat. Only in that realm can we make changes. If the tzaddik maintains that level of Eitz Hadat, Eitz HaChaim, and never, that's why they say about Hasidim, that's why they say Moses. Look what Moses contended with. Look what Yaakov contended with. Selling of his son, fleeing from Esau. I mean, his life was not one that we might say of contentment and serenity. No. Always on the go, always facing the problems of why was he undergoing those for our benefit. Because each time we read an incident whereby he overcame the problems of Eitz Hadat, that is our clue and our opportunity to achieve the overtaking of what we see, unfortunately, most around us is chaos and havoc. So here we have the opportunities of all future events, to be in a position of overcoming whatever insecurities and uncertainties will be in the future. That's why this nevuah took place in Egypt, not because he didn't achieve this prophecy in Israel, or they couldn't achieve this prophecy. Of course they could. But to overcome is what this parsha is talking about. To master, to have dominion over the world of Eitz Hadat with all of its chaos and havoc, then you've got to deal with it. That's why both of them, both Yaakov and both Moses also fled Pharaoh, came back, and then of course his 40 worst years were the years that he dealt as leader of the Jewish people. All he had from them was only constant troubles. But only in that realm could Moses provide for us in the future the opportunities of overcoming as he overcame, as he was not subject to those rules. And because he was not subject to the rules, he overcame. All right, then the verse goes on to say, Vahi achar hadvarim oele, and after this discussion that Jacob had with Joseph about him promising Jacob that he would not be buried in Egypt, he would take him back to Israel. The word comes to Joseph that his father is ill, and takes his two sons. He takes his two sons, and we then have the familiar blessing meaning, of course, the method, the wording, by which we, in turn, hearing the blessing, receive the direct connection to the Eitz HaChaim, as he was subject. And here the Zohar says, Amar Rab Chizkiah, what's it want to tell us over here? Joseph came and took his brothers. Obviously, we're not, as the Zohar constantly cautions us, not reading this particular section in Vayechi so we can hear a story. But lo ba katuv lashmeinu masha asa Yosef. And don't make any mistake that when it discusses here, and this is the affirmation, when it discusses that Joseph comes and he's going to have now, he's going to ask Jacob to please bless his children and so on, says the Zohar clearly. The verse did not come to let us hear what happened here with Joseph and his children. But every word here in this parsha is coming to tell and enlighten Joseph, we, in 1993, what will take place in the future? Shekol elu yil l'sof aminyan shenimna. Da'ainu l'sof shesh alafim. First of all, isn't it unfair? He calls Joseph. He's going to bless Joseph privately, individually, and his two sons, and so on. Says the Zohar, no. Joseph, as we know, is the sixth Sfirah. Sixth Sfirah. And therefore, says the Zohar, when it was written 2,000 years ago, and the Jews, the sons, the other sons knew that the ultimate redemption would come at the end of 6,000 years. How do we know? How do we know that that's when it ends? How do we know? We're told 6,000 years. But here, says the Zohar, is the indication that this exile, what does exile mean? Not everyone is in exile. Many people who feel living in the United States is not living in exile. There's freedom. For those who have freedom of want, freedom of anything, and have all the blessings that can be bestowed upon them. Do they feel in exile? The answer is no. What about Jews who live in Israel? Consequently, they do not feel the exile. Don't go there and find out, because I can assure you that if there's a little hell on earth, you can find it in Israel. So, the exile, the concept of exile or redemption, is not referring to a state of being in Israel or not being in Israel, but rather it is an individualistic idea of being in exile or being redeemed. Either you're connected to the Eitz Hadat, then you're in exile. If you're connected to Eitz HaChaim, you're not in exile. You are redeemed. What does it mean, redeemed? You have been redeemed. You've been taken out, like Pidyon Haben. We take the child out of the realm of Mavet, as the Zohar explained, out of the realm of death, and bring him into the realm of life. That is what redemption means. It's not some religious terminology of God will redeem us. Redeeming means we move out. We remove. When we redeem something, you have a coupon. You redeem the coupon. Is that the expression? Well, what is happening? You're going out of exile? Why do they use the word redemption? Then they do use the word redeem. Redeem means what? There is an exchange of something at the present for something in the future, something which generally means something better. That's what the word or the connection of redemption has to whatever event is taking place. So, this little event here is bringing us, when we hear this reading on Shabbat, is bringing us to what? To the end of the 6,000 years. In other words, we have an opportunity here to bypass, if we have this consciousness, to bypass all of the physical events that have already been included in our personal cassette, the physical events that we must go through because of cleansing processes of prior incarnations, or for some of the evil doing that we may have incurred in this present lifetime. All of these necessary cleansings, which is called the period of exile, the period of where there is no control over the events of the Eitz Hadat, over the events of havoc and disaster, troubles as we know it. But what he did here in this little section, says the Zohar, and why he called Yosef, there was a quantum leap right to the end. The end is always good. The end is always good. What is called the end? What is the end? That means when a person reaches 98 or 120, it'll be good. Not necessarily. Why? Because for him, the end might be another incarnation, and so it's still a continuing, ongoing process of cleansing. So, to be certain that at the end, at the end, things will be good, because that is the cardinal rule. When someone has completed all of its purifications, he comes to a place where there is no havoc, where there isn't the individual misfortunes that each one has been afflicted with. No, we can take a quantum leap and jump right over these events of the cassette that we all must weave ourselves through. And therefore he called Joseph, not to tell us a story, says the Zohar, about Joseph and coming to get the blessing, but by connecting to this blessing, which is the blessing for Joseph, gives us an opportunity to make a giant leap over the events of tomorrow and the next day, if chas v'shalom, for us personally, they might spell out disaster. Disaster, again, disaster is, and havoc are within the realms of illusionary time. Person goes bankrupt. Does it mean he's finished? Everyone who's gone bankrupt never recovered? Of course not. Everyone who became ill didn't recover? Of course not. Everyone who went through marital problems or family problems, where it seemed to have come to an end, does that mean his happiness came to an end? Or this might have been one of the stages that the individual goes through to achieve or arrive at an ultimate place in life called happiness. That ultimate place of happiness, wherever it is achieved at this moment. Because, says the Zohar, we're not discussing Joseph coming and a story that evolves around his approaching Jacob and saying, bless my two sons. Talking about making a quantum leap. Quantum leap. Now I know how difficult that is. You might say, well, I'm going to come to the synagogue on Shabbat, and I will have this consciousness because it will be repeated by Moshe again, and he's going to repeat. Now as we come to this section, remember, we can take a giant step forward. Leap. Giant leap. Not forward. Because as you go forward, so you might go fast forward, but each time you got to touch those miserable moments along the way. Who wants that, right? So we must use the word a quantum leap. Going to the 6,000th year. At that period, everyone, if someone has a cancer, a malignant cancer, that the doctor says you've got another 3 days to go, and that'll be 2 days before the end, bet on it. Take all the wages. This person will not die. Why? Because he's come to the place, the end, where the illusion of havoc and disorder, illness, no longer exists. At the end, we know the last day of the 6,000 years. We're now the 5,000 year of 5,753. How many more years is left? How many more years are left? 247. That's it. Now, if the lifespan is extended to 200, now we're in again. We can speed that process. Trouble is, too many thousands of years has our minds been placed in the back seat. Minds are in the back burners. The bodies are what goes forward. That's a problem. We don't make use of our minds. Don't make use of it. You might say, well, anyone's coming to the synagogue of Shabbat will hear Moshe say, now this is what we can benefit here. You know how many of us will be subject to Satan, who's present, and say, hey, wait a second, this is dangerous business. They're trying to take away my work. I mean, I've got so much fulfillment as I see them weaving through all these problems. All of a sudden comes someone and says, hey, look, it's like E.T. up there, right? You didn't have to worry about, the police coming from here to here and here and here, and they were going to catch him on every road, right? He just took that leap, and there he was. Out of reach. Satan, that's not Satan's job. He doesn't want to lose his wonderful players of the act that he performs, in which he personally receives this kind of enjoyment and nourishment at the same time. So the reason why we have this story here, and the blessing, is the blessing of the ultimate, the blessing of the finale. And that we can take this leap right into the last moment where the world of illusion, the world of uncertainty, the world of chaos comes to an end. And therefore it says the Zohar, and the Zohar continues, V'katuv omer li Yosef, hinei avicha choleh. Vayomer, hinei li Yosef, hinei avicha choleh. Rotzalam. What does he want to say? Your father is ill. What does he want to say with that? Rotzaloma sheyavo Mashiach, shehi sod Yosef, because Yosef is Mashiach. Vayomer lo, avicha shebeshamayim, nechpaz lekabel panecha atzofim ala ketz ala Mashiach. Vavicha choleh, perusho, doeg v'nechfu. What does it mean? They came to tell him that your father is ill. Says the Zohar. Can't treat even that obvious connotation that the communist tell him that, his father is close to death. Says the Zohar, don't even permit that expression to take hold. Unfortunately, when we hear it, we're still associated. That's the power of Satan. Even though we have this opportunity to take this leap on Shabbat, take notice of what I'm saying now. It's not going to be easy, because we're going to read about Avicha choleh, your father is ill. Why does it have to say that? Because it wants to, says the Zohar, associate the difficult times, not Yaakov, difficult times, the institution of Satan. Now remember, he wants this institution to keep going on and on and on, never ending. That is the function of Satan. And as we hear these words read, Hinei avicha choleh, your father is ill. At that moment, the power of avicha choleh will enter our consciousness. In the realm of the unconscious, we will hear. Even if you don't understand what avicha choleh means, if you understand it, in a way it's even worse. That's where the idea of a little knowledge is worse than no knowledge at all. And I say, I've said this not only since this message of scanning came to me, which has made the whole world crazy, literally, because 2,000 years you go into a synagogue, those who know how to read. What happens with those who didn't know how to read? What did they do? They decided never to go to a synagogue, right? All of a sudden, you walk into any center around the world, people are going like this. What is it? People are going like that with their finger. He doesn't even know what an alphabet is, right? He's going with his finger. Because he's making an eye connection with the word. He's revealing light. But he doesn't know what it says. So when someone who doesn't know Hebrew on Shabbat is going to read Avicha Choleh, he doesn't even know what it means. But what about the one who knows Hebrew? He's going to be caught up Avicha Choleh. Oh, wait, the sickness in the world. The fact that we have created a consciousness that there are difficult conditions along the road. You have established what you know is. What you do not know does not exist. I am, so say philosophers, but that part is true without them understanding why. I am because I am. Why do I exist? A scientist says that today too. A chair exists, or I exist. Why? Because I know that I exist. If I do not see the chair, says the scientist, chair doesn't exist. Okay? The fact that we can read Anochi Avicha Choleh, the one who can read that, he's already connected to what? Choleh, in sickness. He's connecting to the physical reality of chaos and disorder. Better, that we didn't even know the translation of the word. However, Better yet still is the expression that I know the word, and I say, but I'm going to control that you do not exist. As Yaakov did in Egypt. For Yaakov to say, here's the blessing and here's the future and I give you, there would be no control over Satan. You've got to take Satan by the tail and say, I'm going to control you. But if there is no Satan to control, there is no total control. That's why Yaakov and Moshe had to be in Egypt to take control of Satan, because that is the habitat. That's where not only the habitat of Satan, but all future Satans, all future chaos that is yet pending in the future is being taken over right here. So am I negating the idea that we should not know what Avicha Choleh means? We should not connect? Of course, but beware. There's the danger. What happened when Jacob wrestled with the angel? Got dirty. You play in mud, you get dirty. Right? But it's the only way. It's the only way. Because for the moment, he's escaped the presence, but you haven't taken him. That's what when the Satan came to God, he says, listen, this guy here, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, you gotta get rid of him. He said, well, what's the problem? He says, I have nowhere else that I can hide from him. Wherever I am, he seeks me out, finds me, and takes control over me. And what's my purpose here? Either you take him out of this world, or you take me out of this world. Both of us cannot coexist just to know where Rabbi Shimon was. There was nothing that Rabbi Shimon could not just turn, control. That's who we're talking about when we speak of Rabbi Shimon. That's what Yaakov and Moshe needed. That's when it's Vayechi. Vayechi is not when you run up on a mountain retreat for a couple of days and relax and so on. And up there, you still have memories of the troubles you just ran away from, right? But they say, forget about your troubles while you're up there. And what does that mean? And when you come back, it's all disappeared, right? Never. The only place it can disappear is when you're inside that mud. When you're inside the mud, only then can you be a leader. Only then can you be a ruler. A ruler. And a ruler is every single person. Only then, when you're in that mud, because that mud doesn't disappear because you have taken a vacation. You must have constant control. And that's why, says the Zohar, Avicha Choleh, just to associate, to give us the opportunity not to tell us a story about Joseph, about Joseph requesting from his father. And then we can understand when it says, and what happened before that. He goes on to tell him, he says, and now your two sons that were born to you here in Egypt, before I came to Egypt, they shall be Lihem Ephraim Menashe Kirubein v'Shimon. First of all, reading this story superficially, one might say, well, that's a little unfair. What about the other children who also had children? And what about the other sons of Jacob? Didn't they have children? Why does Jacob single out these two grandchildren, say, these two grandchildren, Ephraim and Menashe, these two grandchildren, they will become part of the 12 tribes. These two will replace, as subsequently they did, they replaced Levi and replaced Joseph. Why these two? Because these two, said Yaakov, were born in Egypt before I came down. Were born in Egypt. Noladin lecha be'eres Mitzrayim ad boi elecha Mitzrayim. they shall be part of what? Considered my 12 sons. Part of the 12 categories. Why these two? Zohar asked that question. Says the Zohar. Zeu Yisrael lemata shemakomam begalut. And we said Israel, Yaakov, is in the upper realm. Cannot be touched by Satan. Anyone reaching Etz HaChaim, forget, Satan has no hold. But that's not what the Parsha came to tell us about, the greatness of Yaakov and the upper elevations that Moshe and Yaakov and Yosef achieved. No, it's here for us. This whole reading is only here for us. It is not to discuss or provide us with a recording of history, but rather these two, and the verse says that. You know why they're going to be included? You know why? Because these two were born in the mud. These two were born where Satan originated. Look what the Torah wants. Look what the opportunities that if we don't read the Zohar, we don't even know. How do you extricate yourself from problems? How do you get away from it? Oh, I know. There are those of us maybe here or not here, but when I can give them guarantees, and sometimes they tell me, throw them out a bone for a guarantee. I want you to know there are very few takers, right? Very few takers. Who doesn't want financial security? Who doesn't want removal of illness? Is there anyone in the world who would say no to such a suggestion? The answer is no one would ever say no. But to the one that this reading can provide, which Rabbi Shimon says will provide. If you haven't got the merit, I see it every day. Whatever reason, valid reasons, they can't show up. I say they can't show up. Irrespective of my even suggesting, this might help. It is there, but that doesn't mean that every one of us will always be there to take advantage. But know it's there. If at its very minimum that what I've done with you today or taught you today was the idea that in this document, that scroll, and that's why it was given on Mount Sinai, has the purification, has the elimination of the world of Eitz Hadat. It contains it. It's there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Satan cannot put a few stumbling blocks along the way and prevent us from making the connection. Even to the point, as I said, if there's going to be someone who reads Avicha Choleh, he says, oh, the poor guy got sick. And you killed it right there. You killed it right there. That means you're in the synagogue, you're reading it, and you're connecting with what? With illness, right? Because you know what it means. And for the moment you lose that consciousness, say, no, wait a second. The reason, as Zohar said, why it says Avicha Choleh is to takes illness by the tail and control it. That's why it says. Not to be in that negative perspective of, Jacob was ill. Get caught up in the words. Nothing more. You're caught up in the words, you lost your consciousness of control. It's like someone drowning in business. Is he adept to listening to new ideas? He says, what are you talking about? The bank just called me. I got to run down to the bank, plead with them to extend my loan another couple of days so I can handle it. But I got the answer for you. Very few people will listen to the answer. Very few. Right now, he's got this pressure on him. This is what at the same time in this Parsha, says the Zohar, while it's providing us with a leap over our own individual cassettes. An opportunity. An opportunity that comes only once a year, according to the Zohar. It comes only once a year. And all of the 12 blessings and everything that this Parsha contains. Just hurriedly, I want to. Anyway, so he says, V'heim banav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu noladim bein ha'amim. These two sons were born outside of Israel, amongst the nations of the world. The disbursement, the exiles. They were born outside the protection. For those of us who are outside of protection in any given manner. Now these two, although that's where they are, they will be considered and can be considered within the confines of my protection. He wasn't just choosing two sons, two grandchildren, favoring, as most people when they read this particular section, say, but that's unfair. Taking these two particular grandchildren over the others. These two, he says clearly, because they have Satan, Bein Ha'amim, amongst the nations of the world, exile. I mean, you can live in the United States and not be subject to an exile. He wasn't talking about exile from the point of view of a government placing us into exile. The problems. Israel is not a land. You could be in Israel and be full of problems. The land is not what determines freedom, but rather the removal of the dominion of Satan over our lives is what the pasuk here is talking about. And so he brought him into this confine of control. The same way as when he's going to shortly bless his children. And it says clearly, Vayikra Yosef el Banav, and Yaakov el Banav, and Yaakov assembles in chapter 49 all of the children, Vayomer, and he says, this is so clear, says the Zohar, Hey asvu v'agida lachem et asher yikra etchem ba'achrit hayamim. Gather around me. I want to tell you all that will ever take place in the days to come. Everything. Hikafsu v'shimu b'nei Yaakov, v'shimu el Yisrael avichem. And come and gather and listen to my words. Listen to the words of Israel, your father. Then what happens? He blesses each son. Not telling them what the events are going to be. Contradicts. Here he says very clearly that he wants to tell them. Wants to tell them that which will occur in the future. And goes on to bless them. Says the Zohar. And if he told them everything that was going to happen. Now we know, the doctor says, malignant, chas v'shalom. Prognosis, everyone knows, right? But what can you do about it? That's just surgery. And we'll hope. What caused it in the first place? Oh, I don't know. I mean, so why would you assume that when this malignancy began, where did it come from? Are you cutting away from where it came from? What kind of question you're asking me? Do I know where it came from? How can I cut out something I don't know? I've never seen. I can only tell how it became manifested. So he knows the prognosis. He knows everything. He knows the whole future. Only one item he doesn't know. One item he's still not sure about. Did he eliminate the cause by the removal of that? The answer is no. So now the person knows the future. Now what? That's what Parshat Vayechi is about. He said, I want to talk to you about the future. But everything that will happen in the future, and it makes no difference what the future has in store. You know what what the future of chaos means. One, it affects it. One this way, another way. But that's not what the Torah is about, says the Zohar. I'm here to give you the remedy. I'm here to give you the opportunity to change all of this. And that's why when he goes on to the blessings, and the expression blessing in disguise, yes, it was a blessing in disguise. But not like we understand it to mean a blessing, but it's disguised in every single word. In what we consider to be blessing. It doesn't even say that he's going to give him a blessing. No mention here that Yaakov is going to bless his children. But when you read it, what is he doing here? He's giving him a blessing. Sometimes he doesn't even give him a blessing. Here he's cursing. Here he's cursing the anger of Shimon and Levi. If you remember what Shimon and Levi did, destroyed the entire city, all male population of Shechem, of Nablus. And he's reminding him, is that called a blessing? And yet, if you look into your English or Persian or French translation, that's the way they're discussing this Parsha. He gave them the blessing. But he didn't gather them to give him a blessing. It doesn't even say that. And yet, in the absence of a Zohar, well, how else do you translate it? What else is this? What is the connection? And the answer is remedy. The remedy. The remedy of today until the end of our days is right here. Yes, at Hashem. We'll take these quantum leaps and cut out a lot of the cassettes and bring tomorrow, or 247 years hence, to today. Amen.
A sick person can give bracha.
Of healing, yes, when he himself is sick.
Yes.
Why did he heal himself first? Good observation.
Nobody else.
Good observation, right?
It's not been told of Parshat Vayechi that explained there about the elimination of the negativity on the year of 5,760. Isn't it? So it means that it's only 7 years from now, even less than 7 years from now.
Right.
So what is that to do with 200
in case some of the people here forgot about that, so at least we know. He says that, remember, the closer we get, Avram Azulai is closer than Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon speaks in one term. And then we know that Mashiach could have come on many occasions. The Ari could have brought Mashiach, but it didn't work out. It didn't work out. Now Avram Azulai is closer, and he is not even giving any stipulations like the Ari. The Ari had every time there were conditions. Tanaim, always Tanaim. When Avram Azulai wrote what he wrote it without any conditions.
But still, it can be based on that.
But he's speaking in the 6,000th year. That's why it's Yosef. So it coincides with the Zohar.